Welcome to Permission to Breathe, a transformative podcast dedicated to providing a safe space where you can inhale deeply and exhale freely while embracing your grief journey unapologetically. I am your host, Dr. Tammy Isaac, a spiritual practitioner, grief advocate and educator, author, and your guide on this journey through grief. This space was born out of the understanding that grief is not just an event, it's a lifelong unfolding. It's layered, it's complex, and often it's silence. And here is where we disrupt the silence. We will talk about the grief that lingers after the food stops arriving at your door, the grief that remains when no one calls and no one comes by to check on you. The grief that's complicated, the grief that's ancestral, the grief that lives in your body long before it ever reaches your tears. Every episode, we honor the humanity of grief, the anger, the confusion, the numbness, the longing, and we do so without apology. Whether you're navigating fresh loss, unspoken sorrow, or the weight of a world that just won't pause, this podcast invites you to sit down, breathe deeply, and give yourself the permission you've been waiting for to grieve, to feel, to breathe. Let's begin. Are you grieving and feel like you're struggling alone? You don't have to walk this path by yourself. Book a virtual session with Dr. Tammy Isaac at Breathe Grief Counseling Center. Visit us online at www.breathegriefcounselingcenter.com. Dr. Isaac will help you put your emotions into words. She'll help you reduce the feeling of isolation. She'll help you understand that everyone grieves differently and also help you prevent unhealthy coping mechanisms. Take control of your life with world-class counseling sessions today with Dr. Tammy Isaac. Today we're stepping into a very tender territory and talking about traumatic grief. This is the kind of grief that collides with shock, fear, and trauma. It happens when loss is sudden, violent, or unthinkable. It doesn't just touch the heart, but it rattles the entire body, mind, and spirit all at once. And if you've ever felt like the ground was ripped from under you and your breath stolen, you know something of what traumatic grief feels like. It is heavy, disorienting, and it often leaves us asking, how do I even begin to move forward from here? So in this episode, I want to sit with you in this space and offer comfort and explore what it means to grieve when the unthinkable happens. And my hope is that these next few minutes will give you language, validation, and gentle encouragement as you begin to navigate your own journey or as you walk alongside someone you love who may be carrying this type of weight. So let's take a deep breath. Remember, you're not alone, that we're here together. Let's begin. Before we go deeper, let me pause and say this. If what I share starts to feel too heavy, you have permission to pause me, okay? You have permission to breathe, walk away, and come back later if you decide, because you don't have to take it all in at once, okay? So please remember that. Now, when we talk about traumatic grief, we're not just talking about sadness. This kind of grief gets tangled up with trauma, and that means your mind and body reacts as if the danger is still happening. So if you've ever wondered why I can't move forward, I want you to know it's not weakness. It's your nervous system trying to survive something that felt unbearable. And sometimes that looks like flashbacks, those moments where an image or sound rushes in without warning. A siren goes by, or you catch a certain smell, and suddenly you're right back into the moment of loss. Or maybe it shows up in nightmares where you wake up with your heart racing. Other times it's hypervigilance. You notice that you can't relax in a room until you found the exits, or loud noises make you jump. Your body just feels tense all the time, like it's waiting for the next blow. And then there's avoidance. You may find yourself steering clear of certain places, songs, or even people who remind you of what happened. Sometimes it's easier to stay busy or to numb out when scrolling and alcohol and food or anything that kind of dulls the ache for a while. For some, there's also a feeling of numbness, like the world is muted. You may go through the motions, but inside you feel disconnected, almost like you're watching life happen from a distance. And of course, there's the grief itself, the longing, the ache, the deep sorrow that sneaks up when you least expect it. One moment you're okay, the next you're hit with a wave that knocks you down, and you're so overwhelmed with grief. Spiritually, it can also get messy too. Some people feel like God has gone silent, others are angry. Where were you when this happened, God? Or even prayer or worship can feel really hard to reach for, or to do, or to be a part of sometimes in those moments. And I always tell people that, it can either go one or two ways. Your grief will either push you toward God or push you away from him. And then the body. Don't be surprised if you notice headaches, chest pains or chest tightness, stomach issues, or just the sense that your body won't settle. Because trauma often shows up in the body before the mind can even make sense of what's actually happening to you. Now, I want to be really clear here. If you're having constant flashbacks, if you can't sleep or eat, if you're using substances every day just to cope, or if you're thinking about hurting yourself, please don't carry that alone. I need you to reach out for professional help. In the US, where I am, we can dial 988 for immediate support. Know that you are too valuable to be suffering alone. So, what can help in those raw moments? Here are a few small things that you can focus on. So, the first one is grounding yourself. So, you're going to press your feet firmly into the floor and begin to remind yourself, like, I am here where you are. You can say your name. You can say the date. You can say the time. And then you tell yourself, I'm safe. And this is where I am right now. So it's bringing yourself back into the reality of where you actually are. And you're not actually in that traumatic moment. Then there's also breathing. So you'll try breathing gently and inhale for 4 counts. Exhale for 6, and know that, longer exhales start to tell the body that it's okay to come back down. It's okay to settle, and it's okay to rest. So there are different breathing techniques and activities that are out there that you can use, but simply breathing in for 4 and exhaling for 6 and doing that about 10 times helps to signal to the body that you're safe and you're okay. Then there is the temperature of adjusting the temperature of your body. So what you do is you run cool water over your wrist, or you can hold ice in your hand, ice cubes. And what happens is that quick shift in temperature can break the panic of the cycle that you are experiencing. So it also jolts you back into the reality. And when the traumatic image comes, you can try to give yourself equal time remembering the person's life, and then maybe a favorite memory or a funny story, or thinking about their favorite meal, right? And knowing that trauma always wants to tell the story of how they died, but grief longs for space to be able to remember how they actually lived. So you can create a space where you allow the traumatic image to be, what is it called? To contain the image. Basically, there's a saying, like, you take the image and you imagine putting that in a box and putting it high on a shelf and walking away from it and telling yourself, I'll be back to get that box when I have support or somebody that can help me process through that. So remembering that trauma is just wanting you to relive the story of how they died, but grief really wants you to tell the story and create a space of how they live and how they really blessed and affected your life. And if you're listening because you want to support someone who's grieving in this way, here's a tip. Avoid the at least statements. Don't try to explain their pain away. A better approach is simply, I'm sorry. I can sit with you. Tell me about them. And sometimes silence and presence are the best gift you can actually bring or give or offer someone who's had a traumatic experience in dealing with grief. And here's the truth I want to leave you with in this part of our conversation today. The goal isn't to erase what happened. The goal is to make more room for the memories of who your person was without being trapped only in the trauma of how they actually died. One of the hardest parts about traumatic grief is that the trauma itself interrupts the natural grieving process. When we lose someone under normal circumstances, grief still hurts very deeply, but our hearts eventually start to shift toward remembering who they were, the love we shared, and the life they lived. And it's painful, yes, but it has a rhythm, it has a flow. However, trauma throws that rhythm off. Instead of remembering birthdays, favorite songs, or the way that they laughed, the mind keeps circling back to how it happened. It's like a record stuck on the worst track, playing it over and over. That's why traumatic grief can feel so heavy, because you're grieving the loss and reliving the trauma at the same time. Let me give you a picture of this. Imagine trying to walk two roads at once. One road is grief, where you're mourning the person you love, and the other road is trauma, where your brain is still processing the shock of what happened. Traumatic grief forces you to walk both roads together, and it is exhausting. I feel like grief is exhausting by itself, but doing them both together is overly exhausting. There's a term called dual attention, and it means we need space for both. On one side, the grief side, you need time to cry, to remember, to honor, to talk about the person. And on the other side, which is the trauma side, you need tools to calm the body, to bring safety back to your nervous system, and to process those intrusive images. And your healing really does require both. So you have to have that dual attention. That's also where the idea of a window of tolerance comes in. Think of it like the zone where your body and emotions feel balanced enough that you can actually process what happened. When you're outside that window, either revved up with anxiety and panic or shut down and numb, it's nearly impossible to grieve in a healthy way. That's why slowing down, breathing, grounding, and sometimes professional support are so important. They help you widen the window so you can safely do the work of grieving. And if you've ever felt like you're stuck, like you want to remember your loved one, but your mind keeps pulling you back into the trauma, I want you to hear me clearly when I say this. You're not broken, okay? Your body is doing exactly what it is designed to do in the face of overwhelming danger. It's trying to keep you alive. The work of healing is learning how to help your body feel safe enough so that your heart can actually grieve. And that takes time, to be honest. It also takes patience. It takes compassion for yourself. And it takes knowing that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making room for love and memory to live alongside the pain together. You've probably noticed by now that traumatic grief doesn't move in neat, tidy stages, that it's very messy and it circles back. Some days you feel okay, and the next day you feel like you're right back at the beginning. And here's something I want you to be aware of. Sometimes traumatic grief can grow into what's called complicated grief. Complicated grief is when the pain of loss doesn't ease with time the way we normally expect. Instead, it stays raw and consuming month after month, even year after year. It's like the wound never gets a chance to scab over because every time it starts to, it's ripped back open. And this can look like a constant longing or preoccupation with the person who died. Also being unable to think about anything else, like life has just stopped. You will also find yourself avoiding places, people, or reminders of the loss even long after it actually happened. Or the opposite, feeling completely stuck in the moment of death, replaying it endlessly. And also a belief that life has lost all meaning and you can't imagine a future without your loved one. For some, it shows up as guilt. If only I had done something differently, or they still be here if I did this, you know. For others, it's just anger. Why did this have to happen to us, you know? Or then there's fear, like, if I let myself move forward, am I betraying them? You know, complicated grief doesn't mean that you're weak or that you didn't love your person enough. Actually, it just often means the bond was so deep that your heart struggles to imagine life without them. And when trauma is added into that, it makes it even harder. I want to be gentle here though, also, but also be very honest. When grief becomes complicated, it usually doesn't resolve on its own. And that's the truth. That's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because your nervous system and your spirit need extra care and attention. Therapy groups, support groups, grief counseling, pastoral care. These are not signs of failure. They are tools to help you carry what feels unbearable and what you were never called to carry alone. I want you to think of it in this way. Complicated grief is not about getting over it. That this is something that we mistakenly often believe. It's really about learning how to live again without erasing your love or your loss. And that is very much possible to do. It just takes time. It takes help. It takes support. It takes hope. It takes patience, right? So if you're listening today and you're recognizing yourself in these words, please don't stay stuck in silence. I want you to reach out. Please talk to a professional, a counselor, a grief specialist, a chaplain, or someone you trust, okay? Because healing begins when you let someone else hold part of the weight that you're carrying and never was supposed to carry alone. Let me explain how trauma will always bring grief, but grief is not always traumatic. When you go through something traumatic like a sudden death, a violent loss, or a shocking accident, grief is built into that experience. You're not only grieving your loved one, you're also grieving the sense of safety, the life you thought you had, the future you imagined. Trauma and grief become tangled and intertwined together, but grief on its own isn't always traumatic. If you've ever had the experience of walking with someone through a long illness or saying goodbye to an elder who lived a full life, the grief is still painful, but it might not carry the same level of shock or horror. You can be heartbroken without being traumatized. That's why traumatic grief therapy matters. It recognizes that when trauma and grief show up together, the healing process is different, and you're not just mourning the loss, you're also untangling the trauma your body and mind are still holding on to. And that therapy does both, right? So it helps calm the trauma side, working with your nervous system so flashbacks and panic don't keep ruling your life. And it helps tend to the grief side, making space for memories, for love, for legacy, so you can remember more than just the way your loved one died. So I want you to remember that line: trauma always brings grief, but grief is not always traumatic. If you're living in the space where the two are bound up together, you don't have to carry it by yourself, right? You were never meant to. There are people trained to sit with you to help you unpack it all and to help you find a way to move forward. And then listen, if you're in a season where therapy feels too big of a step right now, that's okay. You can start small. You can start journaling, joining an online grief group, even listening to podcasts like this one that can help you put words to what you're feeling. You know, sometimes therapy becomes possible later when you're actually ready. But I want you to leave this part knowing there is help, there is support, and there are people trained to walk you through this particular path with you. And you don't have to carry traumatic grief alone. You were never meant to, okay? I know some of you listening today may not be the one who's actually going through traumatic grief yourself, but you may be the friend, the family member, or maybe a pastor or someone who's standing alongside someone who actually is. And so I want you to know that you matter and the way that you show up matters, because the way that you show up can either add to their burden or lighten it, even if it's just for a little bit. So the question then is, how do you support someone in traumatic grief? Well, let's talk about it. I have a few things I think will be helpful. The first thing is you want to know that it's important not to rush them. Healing from traumatic grief, or healing from grief, period, is not a quick process, right? It's not about getting over it. So we want to avoid using phrases that have timelines in it that makes the person feel rushed or feel like they're slow or behind in the process of their grief. So phrases like, "It's been 6 months, shouldn't you feel better?" is not helpful. Grief does not work on a time schedule, right? Especially when trauma is involved. So don't rush them. The second thing I want you to know is that we want to be careful with our words. So phrases like "they're in a better place," or "at least they're not suffering," it seems like it can be helpful, but sometimes it can be do more harm than good, because you wonder, the person who have lost someone and here grieving, you hear, oh, they're in a better place. And then it's like, well, how do you know that they're in a better place? And how do you know that in a better place is not here with me? Right? You start to stir up all these different thoughts and questions in the person who is grieving. And so you want to be careful and intentional about the words that you're using. Instead, you want to try to use phrases and words of compassion. I'm sorry, or I'm here for you, right? And then sometimes just being silent, right? Sometimes silence and presence will say more than you could ever say with your words, okay? So don't rush them. Be careful with your words. And then here's the third thing: make space for their story. People experiencing traumatic grief often feel silenced. I want to say sometimes we're either rushing or trying to change the conversation or fix it, or either we are inputting our own story, our own grief, and our own experience and talking about the way that we feel instead of allowing the person to share their experience and what they're going through and what they have experienced. And I think if a person who has experienced traumatic grief is at the point where they want to share their story with you, that is part of their healing journey, that that they got to a vulnerable place to feel like they can share is so monumental that you want to make space for that story, right? And then if they're at the point where they're not sharing, or they feel like, are you sensing that they feel like they shouldn't, you can ask gentle questions to them and say, what do you want me to know about them, about your loved one? Or would you like to share a story of them with me? Just let them talk about their loved one without shifting the conversation or trying to fix it. Okay. So we don't want to rush them. We want to be careful with our words. We want to make space for their story. And then the fourth thing is offer practical support. So trauma exhausts the body and the mind. It is exhausting. It is heavy on those that are grieving. And so they may sometimes also experience what we call brain fog, where they can't focus, can't think about what needs to be done. And it's hard to maintain a schedule for the day. And so some of the practical things that we can offer are like cooking meals, maybe childcare, or carpooling and picking up the children and dropping them off at school, maybe taking them to an appointment or sitting with them at an appointment. These things may seem small to you, but they literally lift heavy burdens off a person who is grieving. So offer practical support, and don't just say, and this is something I always have to work on, is, let me know if you need something. A lot of times they can't think of what they need. And when you notice that they can't think of what they need, offer something that that they need, that they're going to need from day to day, right? So we are making sure that we're not rushing them. We want to be careful with our words. We want to make space for their story, offer practical support. And then here's the 15: respect their limits, respect their boundaries. They may not be ready for gatherings, may not be ready to celebrate holidays, or even do simple errands or hanging out. You want to make sure that you are giving them permission to say no without feeling guilty. And then at the same time, you want to keep inviting them without the pressure. You want to keep inviting so that they know that they're still welcome, but also not in a pressured way that they feel like they have to when they're not ready. And then here's the final thing: hold their grief with patience. I know sometimes we can feel like, oh, you should be over it. Oh, you should be moving on. Oh, you're still here. But trauma can resurface at any moment, right? At any anniversary, any birthday, or even any random moment throughout the day, right? It's going to show up, and you want to be able to hold space for them and be patient with them as they work themselves through what they're experiencing at the moment. Okay. And know that your consistent presence over time is what means more to them than anything you could ever say or offer. Okay. Your presence, your consistency when I was grieving, the people that I remember the most are the ones who are most consistent. Even though when they text, I didn't respond. Even though they called, I didn't always answer, but they continued because they knew and they had been through their own journey to understand what a person is experiencing at that moment. Okay. And then here's the last thing. If you're a part of a faith community, I also want you to consider this, that you want to offer lament and not just hope, right? So we're always just getting people to the hope, but not allowing them to express the lament and the pain and suffering that they're going through. And sometimes the most healing prayer isn't, Lord, make it better, but Lord, I need you in this pain. I need you in this suffering. Lord, this is how I feel. We need to be able to allow people to wrestle with what they're experiencing, wrestle with the doubt, wrestle with hard questions without judgment, to God, right? To their deity and whoever they worship at that point, right? Is to have this intimate moment. And a lot of times we think intimacy is just about lovey, lovey, huggy, huggy, kissy, kissy, these wonderful moments. But intimacy is also having hard conversations. Intimacy is being vulnerable in places that are hard to show and bring up. And these are the moments when you can work through these tough conversations in intimate relationships that bring you closer together and bring more trust within the relationship, right? So remember, your role is not to fix their grief, it's to walk with them in it. It is to remind them that they are not alone and that even in dark moments, they will know that there's still someone who is beside them that is willing to sit with them in the silence and be able to hold their hand even in the midst of the darkness. It is so that they would know that there are people out there who is not afraid of their pain, not afraid of their struggle, not afraid of their wrestle, not afraid of their doubt, not afraid of their lack of trust and faith, but they will allow them to experience what they are experiencing at the moment until they overcome. As we close, I want to give you a moment just to breathe. You've walked with me through some very tender ground today, and through the weight of grief, the shock of trauma, and the ways that they weave them together has been very heavy. So let's pause. If you can, I want you to place both feet on the ground, on the floor. And for 4 count, I want you to inhale slowly. Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's do that one more time. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, as you sit with your breath, I want you to remember this. What you feel in your body, the memories that rush in, the sorrow that lingers, none of it means you're broken. It means you've been through something that shook your world. And healing takes gentleness, patience, and sometimes it takes the courage to reach out for help. Now, today we've talked about the way trauma can interpret the grieving process, how it can keep you replaying the how instead of remembering the who. And we've named the heaviness of complicated grief and the possibility of finding support through therapy that tends to both the trauma and the loss. And we've touched on the gift of community, the friends, family, and faith companions who hold space when the weight is too much for us to bear. Now, if you're grieving right now, know this. Healing doesn't erase your love. It simply makes room for it. And if you're supporting someone who is grieving, know that your steady presence, your patience, and even your silence can be a lifeline. So as you step back into your day, I want you to carry this truth with you. It's okay to breathe. It's okay to rest. And it's okay to ask for help when the load feels unbearable. You don't have to carry this alone. You were never supposed to anyway. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself and hold close to the love that still lives within you. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Permission to Breathe podcast. I hope today created space for you to breathe and find peace on your journey. I invite you to join me again next Monday for another episode as we continue to navigate this path together. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share the podcast. Until next time, take care and keep breathing unapologetically.